Bravely Default is still my favorite game on the 3DS. It single-handedly rekindled my love for JRPGs, heck, saved it even. Its sequel Bravely Second would have a lot to prove, so as a fellow fan I'd like to inform you about Bravely Second's merits, but also its shortcomings as well. One of the biggest strengths of Bravely Default was its characters. The story took enough time to introduce them and flesh them out as you continued playing, be it through conversations or the challenges that were thrown against our heroes. The two most important new members are Yu and Magnolia. At a first glance, Yu is a naive young boy that is guided by his own well-meant ideals and his position as the leader of the Crystal Guards. While it took a while for me to see Yu as more than just some ignorant kid, he did grow on me over time, since the story does take the effort to make Yu's personal struggles believable and interesting. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about Magnolia. Sure, she's the first we have seen from Bravely Second way back before the game was even out, and she does play something of an important role, but there isn't really much to her story or her troubles at all. She's presented in a cute, innocent, or even sexy way through her personality or clothing, but aside from her pretty face that can speak in French, there isn't really much going on. Oh, did I say she can talk in French? Cause the game will remind you how French she is all throughout the game, constantly reacting in French and immediately translating after saying something. It's cute at the beginning, but after the 10th time I was just all, oh my god, please stop, we get it. Maybe I'm just being overly critical, but in comparison, Yu's struggles to adjust to his role were much more interesting than the ones of Magnolia's.
I'm Magnolia Arch. And it's time to bust some balls!
Aside from those newcomers, the lovable old party members are back again as well. Without going too much into detail as to who exactly comes back, I did enjoy that one of those members was given even more character development, and the other one showed that the experiences from the last game has changed them in their worldviews. It's great to see progression in that regard, making a return to this world all the more fulfilling for people that have played the previous game, which, by the way, you should, before going into this one anyway, as the story is clearly progressing the one that got started with the previous title. For as good as the characters usually were in Bravely Default, most of its antagonists didn't really go beyond, hey, I want to ruin everyone's life cause I'm like evil or whatever. Thankfully Bravely Second does much better in that regard, giving most villains a reason for their actions. Even if you didn't play Bravely Default, you may have heard of the serious pacing issues of its mid to late game. I am so thankful they didn't make the same mistake in the sequel. Meaning the story flows naturally and doesn't make you feel like you're wasting your time. However, I do have to say that the sequel essentially reuses around, let's say, 50% of its assets. That goes for characters, music, environments and job classes. For that reason, Bravely Second sometimes comes off as an expansion rather than a new game altogether. To be fair though, most of that is only apparent when you play the side missions rather than the main story, which as a whole has new places to offer. Talking about side missions, instead of just beating someone up, this time around they also come with a moral dilemma of options that you have to choose from. While this does sound like an interesting addition as it basically gives you a bit more control in an already very linear game, those choices are hampered by the fact that each outcome offers you a different job class, making it sometimes less a choice of morality and rather your gaming sense, which job class you want to have for your characters. Personally, I'd advise you to ignore that and just go with what you think is right. Musically, Bravely Default... What the hell?
This just in. It didn't take long for the internet to notice that Bravely Second has been left too long on the cutting board. Most notable, side missions now have less possible outcomes since the option for other choices are simply missing. As in Bravely Default, the costumes of some characters got changed to be less revealing. That's nothing new really. But this also includes a complete visual change of the Tomahawk class, from a traditional Native American look to a cowboy one. That's racist. Experts agree that this is fucking dumb. Strange changes aren't stopping there, since the art book even had a few of its images missing. Some most likely for violence, others because of implied BDSM. That stands for something. Though those are just speculations. For some reason, the job class of the traditional Native American look is in there. Hopefully, not just out of spite.
These censorship issues are annoying, but at the end of the day I didn't really miss anything. I only found out about this after playing through Bravely Default. This also goes for the missing outcomes of the side missions. I just played through them and felt fulfilled with just that. Moving on, after the change of its composer from Revo to Ryo, the music unfortunately feels less varied. This is extremely noticeable whenever a character does their special attack and their theme starts playing. In Bravely Default, those tracks were always very distinct. Bravely Seconds I already forgot. This is mostly because a lot of the music from Bravely Second is extremely e-guitar heavy. There are still some cool tracks, also without e-guitars, but all in all, it's just not as striking. It's still good music, I suppose, but much less memorable, which is frankly quite a shame. The battle system is still one of the most unique and fun when it comes to turn-based combat, but it's also just the same as before. Turn-based combat that uses the Brave and Default system. To keep the explanation short, you can use Brave to execute an action multiple times, but you will have to sit out the amount of times you preemptively spent. An offensive tactic that allows you to potentially end the fight before the enemy has the chance to retaliate. Or you use Default to save up turns, take less damage, and use all these saved up actions at once without having to wait during your next turn. A defensive strategy you could use when the enemy prepares to unleash a strong attack. By the way, just as you, enemies make use of the Brave and Default system as well. It all seems a bit difficult at first, but you'll get the hang of it. The ability to use up turns and strike down your foes in one swoop makes fights go over quite quickly, if used correctly. Grinding becomes almost a non-issue because of that, not surprising since Bravely Default always seemed to be about convenience and options. You can change the difficulty whenever you want, make challenge runs via turning off EXP, gold or job points gain, or decide when you want to have a random encounter and how frequently they occur. Unfortunately, the design of Bravely Second is quite predictable, just as its predecessor was. It goes from dungeon, boss, story, dungeon, boss, story, and so on and so forth. It feels like playing in a safety bubble. You always know the level range of your environment, and you always know when a boss encounter will happen. There's just very little surprise apart from its narrative. Another twist to the combat is Bravely Second. Yes, it's called just like the game, which was already available in Bravely Default, but in this game it has at least story-wise a higher role. The ability Bravely Second stops time and you get one free action that isn't limited by the 9,999 damage cap. That way, you can also use another social feature of the game, where you can summon the characters of your friends and they will execute a super strong attack that may even kill bosses with just one hit, making the game very easy again. As I said, it's all about options, you don't have to do these things. The actual newest gameplay addition is the continuous battle feature. When you beat enemies during your first turn, you will have the option to continue on fighting. You won't get back the actions you spent, but if you got still something left, you essentially can do this for as many times as you manage to kill everything in one turn. The further you go, the more bonuses you get. It's a welcoming addition as it helps to progress your characters much faster if you play your cards right. Unfortunately, this feature is a bit too overpowered, as I personally came up with a setup that basically made my characters be level 60 in a 30 region, kind of breaking the difficulty early on just by merely grinding for an hour. Granted, that's my fault, however I do think that the system is a bit too easy to abuse. If not for that, the game is challenging enough for the most part, but you may want to play on hard anyway. You can always change it back to normal. There are plentiful of different classes in this game, a class meaning something like Black Mage, White Mage, or your typical warrior class, thief, and so on and so forth. It gets quite crazy. Each class has their own levels and work on every character, meaning that there are plentiful of different party setups. Finally, the so-called favorites feature makes it possible to save up these setups. This goes for abilities, cross abilities with a secondary class, and the equipment. A much needed addition in this game. As before, you will rebuild a town. This building social-like game works just as before, though this time the items aren't as necessary to get anymore, luckily. Oh, and I almost forgot about this Chomper minigame. It basically serves more as a fun distraction rather than anything really useful, but you can get some gold from it if you spend enough time on it. But honestly, you're better off just fighting in my opinion. It's cute though, I'll give it that. Admittedly, the gameplay has barely changed from Bravely Default, but it got tweaked in areas where the previous game had some problems. So, in conclusion, Bravely Second still has an amazing cast to offer. This goes for your own party and all the other characters as well, and the story takes its time to introduce most of them properly, and gives them interesting struggles. The story itself unfolds quite naturally, and does not waste your time. Thank you for that. Villains are more now than just evil, their motivation is also much better explained. Side missions successfully change up your story progression and give you some more control over a very linear game. While not much has changed, the old Brave and Default system works just as well, and offers more interesting combinations. The favorites feature is a nice bonus too. But of course there are also some problems and things people will not necessarily agree on, meaning we come to taste. Magnolia is not very interesting. Some people seem to really like her, but she gets overshadowed by the strong presence of the other characters in my opinion. It's great to see this world again and the characters it inhabits, but it's simply too much. I'm sure Yo is a great composer, but the lack of more diverse instrumentals make a lot of the songs so forgettable. I suppose you could argue that those moral dilemmas are even tougher, cause you may have to get a job you don't want just to get your preferred outcome, but honestly I don't really buy it. It's still just a game, so Aside from the story, the overall progression of what you're actually doing doesn't really change up that much and makes everything so predictable. Grinding is just too easy. It almost seems ridiculous to say that grinding is too easy. I know that's just a choice for everyone, but I don't know. It's too easy? Sorry, maybe I'm just salty for ruining the difficulty of my mid-game. Yeah, I probably am. It did really feel good, trying to trick the system. I'll give it that. That was really fun. And there you have it. Bravely Second successfully improves on the strengths of its predecessor, but unfortunately doesn't take many risks, and feels comfortable to stay in an already established universe. It's basically more of what most already loved. If you can get behind that, I hope I could answer your question whether you should play Bravely Default. Wait, did I just... I mean Bravely Second. Anyway, let me first off say thanks to channel ... for letting me use his Bravely Second footage. Without that, I basically couldn't have made this review. If you wanna see more unedited footage of Bravely Second, why not give that one a look? As for me, sheesh, it's good to be back. Well, it's not like I didn't do any video work in these past months. Aside from a rather large project I'll talk about another time, I did the video editing for a commentary series about the anime Erased. The last episode is gonna be up on this channel by the way, so you may wanna catch up with that on the channel from GoJesus, who I did a commentary with. Oh, and if you haven't even played Bravely Default yet, which as I said you should before diving into Bravely Second, I made a video about it ages ago. Okay, that's enough. Enough advertising. Thanks for watching this video. See you next time.